Good morning, everybody. It's Reva with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and we are doing our second How Do I on reading a pattern. So if you didn't see it, or just as a review from last week, 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, we talked about how to read a pattern. So let's do a quick, just catch you up, and then you can go back and catch that video. And I'm coming around, I'm coming to you. Okay, so this is the cute little pattern that we're working with today. Now, the one thing to remember is that when you buy, this is the first thing you need to remember, is when you buy a pattern, you do not buy your actual size because they lie. Fact of the matter is, it's not going to work. So what you need to do is look at the measurements. So go armed to the store with your measurements, bust, waist, and hip, and then find the pattern that you best fall in. So if you are you're not going to be the same size no matter what you do. You're not going to fall within one size. So look at whatever is biggest. So if your hips are the biggest and you fall into this category for the hips, then that's the size pattern you're going to want to make sure you have. And then we'll take in the rest. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the fabric, it does list the sizes here. So again, you would go with your hip measurement. So let's just say for giggles and grins that you're a size 18, and so you want to make sure that for the view A, B, or C, whichever one you want to do, is that you get the right amount of fabric that says for that that particular size. Okay, and notice right here under dress A, it says 60 inches. It's assuming that you're using a knit that's 60 inches wide. If you're using a fabric that's narrower, you're gonna have to get more fabric. All good? Okay, so let's talk about laying it out. So we're going to recap really super fast on what you want to do to get your pattern the right size. So let's say, for example, we were a size 18. You want to cut all your patterns out to size 18. Now, you might be a size 6 or 8 in the store when you buy stuff at the store, ready-made garments. Guess what? You're going to be a 14, a 16 in a pattern. Don't let it bother you. They just lie. It just doesn't work. Okay, so you want to get your pattern pieces cut out. And these were nicely cut out. And this is just all at the biggest size in this pattern envelope. It's a size 20, looks like 24. Okay, but we're going to talk about how to adjust that size just really super quick. Then we're going to talk about laying out. So this is the front, and it's the front for all views, A, B, and C. Those are the different views, and its pattern number is 3. So in your pattern, the pattern information that comes, it actually somewhere in here lists what each pattern number is. Oh, it's probably on this one that's all folded up. But it will say pattern A is the facing, pattern B is the, whatever. Or I'm sorry, 1, 2, or 3. Because if it gives you an A, B, or C for the views or the style, then it will do 1, 2, 3 for the pattern pieces. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. It has a different style of line for each size. So the 18 is solid, then we have a little dots or 16 solid, 18 is little dots, dash and dot is 20, long dashes is 22, and another solid line is the 24. Okay, so let's look at our sizes. Now this is somebody's, oh, they're right here. This is a friend of mine's sizes that she's going with for this one. And she's actually rather tiny. It's just, she had to buy the big size pattern. So again, no judgment, right? So we've got a 46.5 inch bust. And where did that pattern envelope go? You'd think I'd know right where everything is. So at 46.5 bust, she's a 24. Okay? A 40 inch waist, well, that's a 24. And a 48 hip, oh, I don't have to do anything. She's 24. Okay, so let's look at this, though, and pretend for a minute, because I think I have permission to pretend on the pattern. Let's say, I'm going to put this under here, hoping that you can see it a little bit better. So this particular person's consistent and she's going to be good. Now this fabric, this pattern is made to use with knit fabrics. And so if you take a pattern that is designed for knit fabrics and you sew it in a cotton, like a quilting cotton, it's not going to fit because you need extra ease to move. Right? Knit has what's called a negative ease, so it's going to be smaller than the same style dress would be if it was out of a woven fabric. Okay, I hope that answers any questions. If you have any questions, please type them in and we'll see if we can get those answered for you. Okay, so one thing to remember that is important are the notches. These notches are going to help you line up other pieces. So 2 notches means it's going to hook to a back piece. And that makes sense because this is the front and it has to hook here on the side to the back piece. So that's going to be a double notch. The single notch is for the front side. So on the sleeve, did you know that sleeves are not symmetrical? There's a front and a back to a sleeve. So on the sleeve here, there's a single notch and there's a single notch there. On the back side of the sleeve, there's a double notch and there's a double notch on the back piece. Okay, so you're gonna, those notches are important. You can clip them in, we'll show you that, or you can mark them in a different way. So let's take a look at our pattern. Let's talk about sizing our pattern. Let's say, I'm going to stay away from the 24 measurement here because that actually works for our person. But let's say she has a 20-inch bust and a 20-inch, size 20 bust and a 16 waist. Let's go with that. So I have my French curve. This is the bust area, and here obviously is our waist. Okay, and you can see right here it even says waistline. So this is where the waist is. If you're long-waisted, you would cut along here and spread the pattern apart however much you need. Maybe you need an extra inch or so. That's where you would do that. Okay, so we have her at a size 20 for the bust, but a 16 in the waist. So what we're going to do is use the lines that are here, but take your French curve and line up with those 2 measurements. So see how I'm going down toward my the waistline. Well, the waistline's right here and we need to get to the 16. So I'm going to just draw that line here, and that's my new line there. Then I'm going to reverse the curve and get it to fit so I can come in and get a smooth line to blend in. Okay, does that make sense? So you went from one size down to another size, and then if we need to go back out the hip, let's say we did need to go back out the hip, and hip line is usually about 4 inches below the waist, so we'll aim for about right there, and we need to come back out here. So I'm going to, boy, this is a total, this is like an hourglass figure to the extreme. So I would draw a little bit there to make sure it's smooth, and then match that up. Okay, so does that, hopefully that makes sense. We have some simple alterations that you can make using a multi-size pattern. So back in the day, you would buy a pattern for the size that you wanted, and then you were stuck. So having multi-size patterns is really handy because then you can see where you can make changes so it fits you best. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, if not, holler at me. Okay, now let me get out my magic box here. We are going to, I need to get pins. I didn't grab any pins. Or do I have them in here? I just didn't. I did not grab pins. But I have my weights, so I'm okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to lay out this pattern piece. So if you look at the pattern piece, and I'm going to leave this white piece of paper here just so you can see it a little bit. We have the line right here that's center front, it says center front on fold. Okay, so that means that you're going to take your fabric and fold it in half, hot dog, or fold it in at a spot, hot dog wise, and you're going to place this line on the fold. Now, when we're talking about laying out patterns, we do need to look at a couple of things. So when we get to right here, this is the suggested layout for this pattern on the fabric, because it's assuming that you're using the 60-inch wide fabric. So this is going to be the most fabric economic way to lay out your pattern. So it's good to follow that. Okay? Does that, hopefully that makes sense. So in looking at that, oh, let's show you one more thing. I'm going to put it down here. Okay, so white in this pattern means right side. Dots means wrong side. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind too, because this means you need to flip it over upside down. And actually we had a good question after our last class, and they had been told that they should always cut their patterns out upside down. I had never heard that, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. If you choose to do that, you must be consistent through all your pattern cutting that everything is upside down. Unless it says it's upside down, then you got to put it right side up. Okay? So for me, I just stick with everything right side up so I can read it and see the markings and read everything really easily. Okay, so we're going to completely ignore this right now, because that's too much thought on a video to think about how to lay that all out. So we're going to talk about just general laying stuff out. So let me shift some things around. And there's this little bitty baby piece, and I'm going to put this in the pattern envelope so I don't lose it. So hold on. Oh, ironing your pattern. Patterns are nice and creased because they come in a little envelope, right? You can press them, but do so with a dry iron. Don't use steam because it will cause the paper to shrink. Okay, so you don't want to do that. Okay, so now let's take a look at our lovely fabric. So I'm coming around here. Now, this fabric, in this case, it's a wide skirt, so it actually has you fold it in half. Your pattern instructions may have you fold it a third in or a quarter in, just however big it is. Okay, so just look at your pattern instructions. All right, so now what I'm going to use is our handy dandy little tape measure. And what we're going to do, well actually we won't do that for this. I'll show you that in a second. We're going to take this and we want to place it right on the edge. Now, the rule of thumb when you're cutting out a pattern is to be as precise as you can. Because if you make an error here, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger of an error. So for example, if I put this, can you see how I have a little bit of the fabric hanging over the edge here? If I were to position the pattern there instead of right on that edge, then what would happen is that little bit becomes a quarter inch. And then if I don't sew my seams on my side seams the full 5/8 of an inch, if I'm a little bit less than that, then everything gets bigger and bigger, or it gets smaller and smaller if you go the opposite way. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are careful with that. Now, when you're pinning, I'm going to lay this fabric right on here, right on my edge, and I'm going to pin, and I'm going to pin in, get the pin inside where I need to cut, because you don't want to cut over that. Now, I prefer to use glass head pins. They're shorter, they're easier. You want glass head pins that are shorter than this. This is a quilting pin, so it's really long, and it's actually kind of hard to get into the fabric. So, and the reason I say glass head pins is because if you need to press anything, then you can press, and it will, it's not heat sensitive, so it won't melt. Never want it to melt. Now, when you're putting pins in, please be cautious to make sure that you're not doing this and leaving a big bubble. You know, it needs to be able to be nice and flat. And you notice I'm putting in quite a few pins here as I'm going down this center because it needs to be laid out and be secure along the center line, because this center line is very important for the fabric, how it's going to drape, and how the garment will wear. Now you'll also find pattern information here. So for this one, it says if you want to make this longer or shorter, you lengthen or shorten here. Sometimes you'll get a line right through the middle. It says lengthen or shorten here. So keep that in mind as well. Now, once we have this secured, then we can just come in and put a few pins. And I don't know if you can tell, but you notice I'm not really moving the fabric a lot. I'm holding the fabric, kind of anchoring the fabric, and then sticking in the pin so I'm not bunching that fabric up. Okay, now the good news is I'm pinning this, and this isn't even for me. How lucky is the person? But the good news is for them, they get to do it all themselves because this is not laid out according to the pattern instructions. So this will waste fabric. So then you might not have enough for your sleeve. So, ha ha. Okay. All right, so now we've got this piece laid out, and once you cut this out, then usually what I will do is I will put a couple of pins just to secure the pattern piece to the pattern, and I take all the rest of the pins out so I can use them someplace else. But when we're cutting out, I'm sure it's okay if I cut right there, right? Okay, let's see if there's a pair of scissors in here. There should be. Let's hope they cut. Oh, those are painting shears. Okay, so I want to just show you this because this is near the edge, so I know I'm not going to damage too much of the fabric. When we're cutting out, use decent scissors, not ones that have glue and tape on them. This is obviously a pair of scissors that's used for opening boxes. Okay, so there's my pattern piece. What I would do is obviously you want to cut really where it fits, but let's pretend this is, well, no, I'll do here. All you need to do is come in and just in the center of that peak, clip it. Now the fabric has a clip in it, so you can use that as a reference mark. Okay? All right. So, and you know, if I had my choice, I'd be using my Kai scissors because they're yummy. These, wow, there's too much adhesive from tape on there. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about a piece that isn't laid out using a center line or something that's not on the fold. Also, when there is a fold, generally they mean, unless your pattern instructions show you differently, it means the lengthwise piece of the fabric. So if this were the bolt end, this is how it would be rolled up on the bolt. This is the lengthwise. Okay, the lengthwise is what you pull it off of a bolt. So that will be your grain line, is what's parallel with the bolt. What's parallel with the selvage. You can see the selvage here has the fun little fuzzies on this particular one. Can you see that? So that's the selvage. Okay. Now let's look at this. Well, we can take the sleeve. Okay. So the sleeve is different. It's not placed on a fold at all. So you got to make sure it's on grain. Have you ever had a t-shirt that you bought at the store and the body of it twists? And you end up with the seam line going like this, and it's not a design decision, it just feels wacky? It's because it wasn't cut on grain. Okay? So we want to make sure that this is cut on grain. So what you want to look at is this line right here. It says grain line, and we want to make sure it's straight. And you can try to eyeball it, but the really easy way to make sure that it's correct is to take your tape measure and measure over. So I'm going to put my tape measure on the grain line here and measure to 11 1/4 is where I'm hitting that. So I'm good with that. So I'm going to take a pin, ouch, and I just pinned myself. And I'm going to take ever so tiny of a stitch, just a little slip in there. Let me just verify my size again. Okay, 11 1/4 and a half of a widgie. Okay, so I also am too low. We'll do this again. Because look, I'm going to cut that sleeve off, so we don't want that. So let me move it up a little bit. take a little bite just in one end of my grain line marker. Let's measure again because I moved. Okay, I'm at 11 and a 16th. 11. Now I got to pivot a little bit because I wasn't in the right spot. Okay, now I'm in the right spot. So now I can take a pin and pin this end. So on the main part, the main section for the dress there, we carefully aligned the center, right, to the fold. This, we don't have a fold, so we've got to look at the grain line. Does that make sense? Because the fold on the front piece was the grain line because that fold was the half of the fabric. So that way it was ready to go, and that is the grain line. And by the way, this fabric has been pre-washed. That's a great idea to do with any of your garment fabric because the last thing you need it to do is to shrink after you've made it. So if it's a washable fabric, wash it. If it's dry cleanable, have it dry cleaned or steam it really good and get that shrink out of it. Okay?
So Fran said that sometimes she sets a box of pins on top of the pattern piece to hold it in place while she's trying to get the grain line straight.
Oh, Fran, that's a great idea. So, put your pins on it. That's a good idea. Another thing, I know I showed this last time, but I love it. So what can I say? My daddy made me this box for my pattern weights. And then you can just take a pattern weight. And we have some on our website that are not as old as these, that are actually quite nice because they have like the shaping of arm size and things like that. But pattern weights work really well too, especially if you're a rotary cutter. Then you don't have to pin really because you can just anchor it with the pattern weights. Okay, so that's how you lay that out. You're going to want to mark those other marks too. Let me find I have a chalk pencil here. So let's take a look right here at this one closest to you here. So we're doing a size 24 on here. So this dot is going to be just as important as this notch is. So I'm going to put a dot in here, or I'm sorry, put my pin straight down on that dot. And then once I'm in the fabric, I'll go ahead and lean that over. And then I'm going to pick up the fabric and give that a little bit of a mark there. And of course you'd have this pattern piece cut out so it'd be easy to access the opposite side. But then you just come over here to the back side and put your mark in there as well. Okay, so if you're using a light colored fabric, you can use like a water erasable or air erasable marker, whatever works for you. Now, I do want to point out something because I think you probably noticed. You're gonna have to come back. Okay, if you take a look, this pattern piece was not cut out exactly because that's just the pattern piece. When this is cut out with the fabric, it will be right on that line. So it's okay to kind of rough cut out your patterns, but do make sure you come back in and you cut right on the line. Because again, this little 1/8 of an inch here, when there's a front and a back, that becomes a 1/4 of an inch. And then if your seam allowance is off, that's more and more and more. And then it just won't fit right and it will end up looking not the way you want it to.
Yeah, and Diane said to make sure to pre-wash any trim too.
Good point. Yeah, pre-wash your trim. It's really important because you just don't want things to shrink and bubble. And you've probably seen a quilt that after it's washed, it has that nice little antique-y bubbly thing. Great for that, not for a garment. Okay. Another rule of thumb too is press as you go. So once you press your seams on your shoulder seams, press them. Okay. And then when you put in your sleeve, press it. And the reason why, this was a really good advice that I got from an instructor when I was in college. She said, the reason why you press as you go is because you can never get back into there once it's sewn to something else. So just make sure you do all your pressing. This fabric has kind of some rayon in it. It has a little bit of a sheen to it. It's really yummy, actually. I'm nervous that an iron's going to make this really be shiny, and you can see exactly where you put your iron. So use a press cloth over top of the fabric so that, if you're worried about it, just use a press cloth. That can just simply be a piece of muslin, something like that, or a real press cloth, doesn't matter. But the last thing you want to do is have an iron a shiny spot. Another thing is you can always press from the wrong side, and then you won't get that shiny iron stuff on the outside. I don't know, have you ever had that happen to your pants? You know, you see even gentlemen with pants that go to the dry cleaner and they have a really shiny look to them on the side seam. Press them wrong side out and you won't get the shiny. Okay, so that's a piece of just a suggestion there. Take your time. There's no one who says that you have to sew fast. It's okay to sew at your nice, comfortable speed. I wouldn't go terribly slow. Just have a nice, moderate tempo to what you can do, where you can stop when you need to. Use your needle down, because if you're sewing along here and you need to stop to reorganize the fabric, if your needle's up, you're going to get off your line and you're going to have a crooked or jagged seam line. So stop with your needle down before you do any adjustment. You can use your needle down button. If you don't have that, lower the needle down into the fabric, then adjust your fabric, and then keep sewing. Okay? So it's not hard. I think you'll have fun. I encourage you to get back and start sewing, and maybe knowing how to read the pattern envelope and understand how to lay out the fabric might be helpful to you. But yeah, have a good time. And is there any other questions? Not yet. So I know you'll leave them in the comments, and we'll continue to monitor those and get those answered for you. But you know, I'm sure by next week, this person will be wearing this lovely dress. That's a challenge to you, who you know who this is. Get it made, and I want to see it. So anyway, we'll see. All right. Okay, well, we'll see you next Tuesday for our next How Do I? We have a good treat for you next week. But until then, we'll see you later.